Have you ever scrolled through social media and felt your blood pressure rise as you read opinions from the other side? Maybe it's the other side of politics, religion, or even sports. We live in a world that is increasingly divided by an us versus them mentality. This tribal mentality runs deep in human history. We were taught to protect and care for our own and view others with suspicion. From ancient conflicts, world wars, to modern political divides, we naturally feel more comfortable around people who are like us and avoid those who differ from us. But what if there's more to life than living in a divided society? What if the most revolutionary act you can do isn't standing firm against people who aren't like you, but actually loving them? Today we'll explore one of Jesus' most provocative teachings, a story that challenges our understanding of loving our enemies. In 2008, Julio Diaz, a social worker from New York City, was walking home when a teenager pulled a knife on him and demanded his wallet. Diaz handed it over without resistance. But as the mugger turned to leave, Diaz called after him, saying, "Hey, wait a minute. If you're going to take my money, the least you can do is have dinner with me. I was just about to head to that diner. Why don't you join me?" Guess what? The teenager agreed. During the meal, Diaz treated his mugger with kindness, asking about his life, listening to his struggles. When the bill came, Diaz said, "Well, I guess you're gonna have to pay because you have my wallet." The young man returned his wallet. He actually shook Diaz's hand, apologized for what he did, and thanked him for dinner and went his way. Let me ask you, would you do something like this? Could you do something like this? Although stories that start this way don't always have a good ending, this modern parable defies our expectations about how we should treat those who try to harm us. Yet, it points out something interesting about the transformative power of unexpected compassion. Our instinct is to divide the world into categories, friend or foe, insider or outsider. We see this tribal mentality everywhere. Political discussions quickly devolve into demonizing the other side. Religious communities can build walls rather than bridges. Neighborhoods segregate along racial or socioeconomic lines. Even families can fracture when values clash. Psychologists call this in-group bias or in-group favoritism, which is our tendency to extend compassion and resources to those we identify with and withhold them from those we perceive as different. This favoritism creates echo chambers where we only hear voices that reinforce our own existing beliefs and biases. The consequences of this kind of thinking is serious. We sometimes dehumanize those who are outside of our circles, making it easier to dismiss their needs and perspectives. We can even get to the point where we justify our indifference towards them. The result is a fragmented society where genuine understanding becomes rare. And this isn't just a modern problem. In first century Palestine, tribal divisions were intense. Jews and Samaritans maintained centuries-old hostility. Religious sects competed for influence. Roman occupation created sharp divisions. Into this divided landscape stepped Jesus. with a message so countercultural, it still challenges us today. When a religious expert tried to limit the scope of the command to love your neighbor, Jesus responded with a story that would upend his listeners' understanding of tribal boundaries. Today, we'll explore this parable of the Good Samaritan, not just as a nice moral story about helping strangers, but as a manifesto that challenges how we determine who deserves compassion. The parable of the Good Samaritan is one of Jesus' most familiar stories. We've heard it so often that we risk missing its compelling message. To fully grasp its impact, we need to understand what prompted Jesus to tell it in the first place. In Luke chapter 10, an expert in religious law approaches Jesus with a question. Luke tells us his motivation wasn't to learn, but to test Jesus. In verse 25, he asks, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus responds by asking what the law says, and the expert correctly summarizes it in verse 27. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus affirms his answer saying, "Do this and you will live." But that's not the end of the exchange. Verse 29 tells us the man wanted to justify himself. So he asked, "And who is my neighbor?" This follow-up question is significant. He's trying to define the boundaries of his obligation. He accepts the command to love his neighbor, but wants to clarify exactly who counts as a neighbor. It's as if he's saying, I'm willing to love, yes, but surely there are limits to who deserves that love, right? Don't we ask similar questions? Yes, I should care for people, but surely that doesn't include people who are ... and we fill in the blank. Jesus responds not with a direct answer, but with a story designed to completely reframe the question. To understand the impact of this story, we need to grasp the cultural context in which Jesus told it. The tension and hatred between Jews and Samaritans was centuries old. It began when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, deporting many Israelites and bringing in foreigners who intermarried with the remaining population. These became the Samaritans. People Jews considered ethnically impure and religiously corrupt. The Samaritans established their own temple on Mount Gerizim, rejecting Jerusalem as the center of worship. They accepted only the first 5 books of Moses as scripture. By Jesus' time, the animosity was so intense that many Jews would travel miles out of their way to avoid even setting foot in Samaritan territory. John chapter 4 verse 9 captures this division with the simple observation that Jews refuse to have anything to do with Samaritans. This wasn't just a preference. It was a deeply ingrained tribal boundary maintained by both religious tradition and cultural practice. With this background in mind, let's read through the parable itself, found in Luke chapter 10, verses 30 to 35. It says, Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I will pay you the next time I'm here." The road from Jerusalem to Jericho was notorious for bandit attacks. It descended about 3,300 feet over just 27 kilometers through rocky, desolate terrain, with plenty of hiding places for robbers. Jesus' audience would have immediately recognized this as a dangerous setting where attacks were very possible. The first 2 characters who passed by, the priest and the Levite, were religious leaders. Various explanations have been offered for their behavior. Perhaps they feared ritual impurity from touching what might be a corpse. Maybe they worried about being ambushed themselves if they stopped, or maybe they simply just didn't care. But Jesus isn't primarily interested in their motivations. What matters is that these religious insiders, the leaders, the ones the audience would have expected to care, fail to show compassion. Then comes the shocking twist. The hero of the story is a Samaritan. This would have been shocking to Jesus' Jewish audience. Notice the thoroughness of the Samaritan's compassion. Jesus says that he felt compassion, he administered first aid with his own supplies, he transported the injured man on his own animal, he brought him to an inn and personally cared for him overnight, he paid for the man's continued care, promising to return and cover any additional expenses. This was a very comprehensive care that no doubt cost the Samaritan time, money, his comfort, and potential safety. And he did this for someone who, had the roles been reversed, might have refused to even acknowledge him. From this parable, we can extract 3 principles about loving our enemies in God's upside-down kingdom. Number 1, love transcends boundaries. Jesus deliberately challenges tribal thinking by making the enemy the hero of the story. In doing so, he forces his listeners to reconsider their predetermined categories of who deserves compassion. The Samaritan doesn't ask about the wounded man's identity, political affiliation, or religious beliefs. He doesn't consider whether the man would help him if their situations were reversed. He simply responds to human need with human compassion. This challenges us to examine our own tribal boundaries. Who have we decided is outside of our circle of compassion? Jesus suggested that in God's kingdom, these boundaries are meant to be crossed. As Martin Luther King Jr. observed about this parable, the first question which the priest and the Levite asked was, "If I stop to help this man, what will happen to me?" But the Good Samaritan reversed the question, "If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him?" Love doesn't ask, "Who is this person to me?" but "Who can I be to this person?" Number 2, love is active, not theoretical. The Samaritan didn't just feel compassion, he took action. In verse 33, we're told he had compassion, but in verses 34 to 35, that compassion takes a tangible form through specific acts of care. This challenges our tendency to keep love for enemies in the realm of theory. It's relatively easy to say, "I don't hate my enemies," or "I wish them well." It's much harder to actively serve them, especially when that service costs us something. Jesus is clear that love for enemies isn't just an emotion or an attitude, it's a practice. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, he says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Both parts of this command involve action. This doesn't mean approving of everything others do or say. And the Samaritan didn't endorse the cultural practices of the Jewish people, but he recognized a wounded human being who needed help. And he provided that help regardless of their differences. And finally, number 3, Love for enemies transforms both the giver and the recipient. When we love our enemies, we refuse to be defined by hatred. The Samaritan refused to let centuries of animosity determine his actions towards a person in need. In doing so, he liberated himself from the prison of hatred. This love also creates the possibility for new relationships across dividing lines. We don't know what happened after the injured man recovered. Did he maintain contact with the Samaritan who saved him? We don't know. Did his view of Samaritans change? We don't know. The parable doesn't tell us, but it opens the possibility that boundaries can be crossed and also dissolved through unexpected acts of compassion. After telling this story, Jesus asks the expert in the law an important question in verses 36 and 37. Now, which of these three would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. Notice how Jesus has completely reframed the original question. The expert asked, who is my neighbor? Seeking to define who deserves his love, Jesus turns the question around by asking, who acted as a neighbor? Focusing instead on being the kind of person who shows compassion regardless of who the recipient is. Jesus' final instruction is simple. Go and do likewise. This isn't just a nice story. It's a call to action that challenges us to reconsider how we relate to those we consider as other. In God's upside down kingdom, the question isn't who deserves my love, but how can I be someone who loves without regard to who deserves it? Because when we truly understand the parable, we realize that the tribal boundaries we so carefully maintain are the very boundaries that God's kingdom calls us to cross.
In life's storms, we need a beacon. HopeStudy.ca shines Bible truth like Peggy's Cove Lighthouse, steady, bright, and free. From the Rockies to the Maritimes, Canadians are finding hope online. Will you visit HopeStudy.ca and let grace guide you home?
So how can we apply this teaching about loving our enemies to our daily lives? Let me offer 3 practical steps. Number 1, identify your Samaritans. The first step toward loving enemies is honestly identifying who they are in your life. Our Samaritans might be political opponents, members of a different religious tradition, people from a different socioeconomic class, or even family members with whom we've had some painful conflicts. They might be individuals who've personally hurt us or groups we've been taught to distrust. The parable challenges us to recognize these boundaries not as fixed realities to be maintained, but as opportunities for compassion. Number 2, practice humanizing the other. One reason the priest and the Levite could pass by was that they didn't really see the wounded man. They saw a problem. It was an inconvenience. The Samaritan, however, saw a fellow human being in need. Consider these practices for humanizing those you've identified as other. Try intentionally seeking out personal stories from people and groups you tend to dismiss. When encountering viewpoints that differ from yours, challenge yourself to genuinely understand before critiquing. Ask, what legitimate concerns might motivate this perspective? Notice dehumanizing language in your own thoughts or speech. When you catch yourself labeling people as, oh, those people, consciously replace those terms with something more humanizing. One of the most remarkable examples of this practice comes from Daryl Davis, an African-American man who has spent decades befriending members of the Ku Klux Klan. By approaching them as individuals and listening to their stories, he has helped over 200 members leave the organization. His method wasn't condoning their beliefs, but recognizing their humanity. And finally, number 3, take concrete action across boundaries. The Samaritan didn't just feel differently about the wounded man, he took action to help him. Loving enemies isn't just about changing attitudes, it's about changing behavior. Researcher Arthur Brooks suggests a practice he calls warm-heartedness, intentionally wishing for the happiness and well-being of someone with whom you strongly disagree. This practice can help change how we relate to those we consider enemies. Remember that love for enemies doesn't mean abandoning moral clarity or boundaries. The Good Samaritan didn't pretend cultural and religious differences didn't exist, but simply refused to let those differences determine his response to human need. This week, identify one concrete action, just one. It doesn't have to be big, that you can take to show compassion to someone in your circle of influence. The parable ends with Jesus' instruction to go and do likewise. This isn't a suggestion, it's a command that lies at the heart of following Jesus. In a world increasingly defined by tribalism, loving our enemies isn't just countercultural, it's actually revolutionary. It's one of the clearest ways we demonstrate that there's more to life than just maintaining tribal loyalties. There's the transformative power of love that crosses boundaries and, in doing so, begins to heal our divided world.
Hope Channel Canada is more than a TV channel. It's a movement of hope, health, and salvation. Lives are being changed each day through our programs. You can become an agent of hope in Canada, whether through prayer, volunteering, or a donation. Your actions create ripples of change. Like threads woven into a tapestry, your small contribution helps to build something beautiful. So visit agentsofhope.ca or call 1-855-4-HOPE-TV to get involved. Thank you for your support.
In April 1995, a bomb detonated just outside the federal building in Oklahoma City, killing 168 people, including 19 children. Among the devastated families was Bud Welch, whose 23-year-old daughter Julie died in the attack. Consumed by rage and grief, understandably, Welch initially supported the death penalty for Timothy McVeigh, the bomber. But something unexpected happened. Welch began to realize that this hatred he had was destroying him. I was going to be dead from it, he later said. So he made an extraordinary decision. He reached out to McVeigh's father, Bill. They met, they cried together, and shared stories of their children. Two fathers from opposite sides of an unimaginable tragedy found common ground in their shared humanity. Welch didn't excuse what McVeigh had done. He didn't pretend the pain wasn't real, but he chose to cross the boundary between victim and the perpetrator's family, one of the most difficult boundaries of all. In doing so, he found a healing that revenge could never have provided. This modern example echoes the ancient wisdom of the Good Samaritan parable. It reminds us that in God's upside-down kingdom, the lines we draw between us and them are meant to be crossed, not reinforced. Today, we've discovered 3 transformational truths from Jesus' parable. First, we learned that love transcends boundaries. Second, we saw that love is active, not theoretical. Third, we discovered that loving enemies transforms both the giver and the recipient. Jesus ends his parable by shifting the question from who is my neighbor to who acted as a neighbor. This subtle change is huge. Instead of focusing on who deserves our love, Jesus calls us to become people who offer love regardless of who the other person is. In our deeply divided world, this message is more urgent than ever. Political polarization, religious conflicts, and social fragmentation make it easy to retreat and remain where we only encounter those who think like us and look like us. Jesus calls us to take a different path. Each time we extend compassion, we participate in God's work of healing and reconciliation. Each act of loving your enemies becomes a living parable that points to an alternative way of being human. And so today, I invite you to identify one boundary in your life that needs crossing. Who is your Samaritan? What step, however small, could you take towards seeing their humanity and responding with compassion? Because in God's upside-down kingdom, there's more to life than tribal loyalties. There's the profound joy and freedom that comes when we love even our enemies. I'd like to take a moment to invite you to partner with Hope Channel Canada as an agent of hope. Here are 3 ways you can do that. Number 1, through your prayers. By praying for this ministry, you are partnering with us and asking God to use programs like this and many others on Hope Channel Canada to share the good news about Jesus with Canadians. Number 2, through your time. If you are able to volunteer, please see agentsofhope.ca for more information on how you can do that and the areas that you can give of your time. And number 3, through your financial support. Your financial contribution helps Hope Channel Canada with ongoing production costs as we continue to provide valuable, life-changing programming across Canada. You can donate online by visiting agentsofhope.ca. And thank you for partnering with us and making Hope Channel Canada possible.